Africa is among 35 UN member states that abstained from voting to condemn Russia's war in Ukraine. The country's ambassador to the United Nations, Mathu Joyini, said South Africa believed in a peaceful resolution and further added that South Africa remained deeply concerned about the escalating conflict in the Ukraine and the international socio-economic implications. Joining me now to talk more on that story is Professor John Stremlau, Honourary International Relations Professor at Wits, as well as Professor Irina Filatova, Professor of Russia's National Research University of Higher School of Economics and Emeritus Professor of UKZN. Good evening to you all, and thank you very much for your time and joining us tonight on In Focus. Professor Stremlau, 141 of 193 countries voting for the resolution, while there are some countries who voted against the resolution and 35 who abstained from voting. And what was this vote for? For many, it's essentially the General Assembly of the UN voting to reprimand Russia over the invasion of the Ukraine. Does that pretty much sum it up?
It does. There were only 5 states that voted no: Russia, Belarus, North Korea, Eritrea, and Syria. And of the 34 or 35 abstentions, 24 of them, Africa abstained, 17 abstained, including South Africa. But 24 African countries voted yes, and 8 didn't vote at all, and 1 voted no. That was Eritrea. So this compares to the 2014 vote when Crimea was annexed, and that was only 100 yes votes, 59 abstentions, I think, and 11 no. So it's moving in that direction of being critical of Russia, but I don't think these votes mean very much. I think what's happening in the last 24 hours in Ukraine is so disturbing and so much a part of what is likely to be a humanitarian catastrophe for the Ukrainian people.
Prof. Irina, resolutions of the General Assembly, as rare as they are, I think this is one that has happened since the last 10 years or so, or maybe even more, are not legally binding themselves. However, they carry with them a lot of political weight. What is that weight showing at this particular time as far as the feeling of international communities?
Well, it is obvious what it is showing. It is showing that the majority of the nations feel that Russia is doing the wrong thing and that they cannot condone it. So that's what it shows. It's a different matter that for Russian president at the moment, I don't think that the United Nations vote means a lot.
Yeah.
He just follows his codes.
Yeah. And that further isolation from the international community, does it have any bearing? Does it really have any weight in this matter?
I don't think so, not at the moment. I think that President Putin at the moment is on a mission. He is on a mission to create the dream of his life, which is the Russian world, which would unite at least Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine. He declares that the Ukrainian nation does not exist, that he believes that it is the same, Ukrainians are the same as Russians. And I must say that in the last few days, he did more than anybody else to create that nation. Zelensky, together with Zelensky, if there were no Ukrainian nation, it has emerged right now. But I believe it was. That's one thing. The other thing, the isolation from the international community. No, I don't think so, because apart from the Russian world, creating of the Russian world, Putin is trying to avenge the collapse of the USSR and the strength of the West, what he feels was the humiliation of Russia. And he feels that this is the last time when he can avenge this.
Yeah. Professor Stremlau, many are saying in analysis, this UN General Assembly vote for the resolution was a diplomatic win for the Ukraine as well as the United States in what they are trying to achieve. Is that significant at all?
I would agree with Professor Filatova. I think she's absolutely right. Today we had a good illustration of this because while there was a second engagement of peace talks, something South Africa supports and I support in Belarus, President Macron of France had a long conversation with Putin, and Putin made very clear, according to the French release of this, that he is determined to win. Now, I made some very big mistakes. I way overestimated the Soviet or the Russian power in deploying all of these 200,000 troops to crush Ukraine, but I also grossly underestimated the resistance that Professor Filatova has already spoken about in the terms of the national mobilization that is going on for civilians and for the military, which has been, after all, fighting the Russians in the eastern region of Ukraine since 2014 in this false flag insurgency that Putin has stirred up in the two republics that he then announced he'd give recognition to. But then that is again an illustration of something that breaks the fundamental norms of what Africans believe in terms of territorial integrity and sovereign equality, despite the spilling over of ethnic affinities. This is a continent full of those, but we praise peace, and fortunately there's been peace between states, but not now in Russia's aggression against Ukraine and the horrendous humanitarian disaster which seems to be escalating in the last 24 hours because Putin seems hell-bent on suppressing at any means. His army has not worked effectively, so he's going to siege these cities with civilians just trapped inside.
Yeah. Professor Stremlau as well as Professor Filatova, I want you both to weigh on this, but I'll start with you, Professor Stremlau. Belarus voted against the resolution, but it's Belarus again that is hosting these so-called negotiations. Belarus obviously leaning very close to Putin in this particular matter. How credible is their call for negotiation, and how seriously should we be taking it considering how they vote and how they've acted?
Well, President Zelensky said he gives very low probability that these will lead to anything, but he does not want to leave any stone unturned with regard to negotiations. And you're absolutely right. Lukashenko, the president of Belarus, won a fraudulent election in 2020. He is a puppet of Vladimir Putin. We were all told that these were 30,000 Russian troops were training and exercise, and they would be gone on Sunday, the 20th of February. And funny thing, they immediately headed for Kiev.
Professor Filatova, what's your analysis of Belarus's intention in holding these talks in Belarus, but on the other hand, at the UN voting against a resolution that condemns the invasion of the Ukraine?
First of all, hosting negotiations does not mean that Belarus has any role in the negotiations. That is absolutely impossible, particularly if you host the negotiations. But the idea that Lukashenko could be a neutral side in this conflict is really ridiculous, because particularly after the uprising that happened in Belarus last year, which was suppressed by Lukashenko with the help of Russia, he became a hostage of Russia. He just can't do anything. I wouldn't say he is a puppet, because he really tried to wriggle out of this of this clutch, of this embrace of the bigger neighbor for a very long time, but finally he did not succeed. And strangely, this democratic movement helped him, helped Putin to finally grab Belarus and sort of turn it into a condition of complete dependence.
Let's take a break. We'll continue. Prof. John Stremlau as well as Prof. Irina Filatova with us, and we'll talk into these issues of abstention and whether or not South Africa abstaining to vote against abstaining to vote in the UN General Assembly vote is something that is against human rights values for us as a country, and whether or not really there is justification for abstaining in this particular matter. Do stay with us. Here on In Focus, Newzroom Afrika, Channel 405, Professor John Stremlau, as well as Professor Irina Filatova. And we are talking, of course, UN General Assembly resolution that was supported by 141 countries out of 193, and what the significance thereof. But also asking the question, is there justification from abstaining in the name of calling for more peace talks? Prof. Stremlau, you already mentioned that this is the reason why some countries, for example, have abstained, saying they would rather, instead of condemning the act, rather call for more peace talks. And the argument that I was hearing so far is that, well, if you condemn one, you will not have any leg to stand on when you want both of them to now come sit at the table when you've already played your card and showed which side you support. Is there justification to abstaining?
I don't think there is a justification to sustain, particularly at this stage in the conflict. You know, back on the 23rd, the Kenyan ambassador Martin Kimani, in the debate that was being held in the Security Council, because Kenya is a non-permanent member, he very eloquently spoke to the values of the AU and of the OAU, and that Africa has inherited these territorial units, which are from the colonialists, which are very fragile, but they did recognize the importance of the principle on which the UN is founded: territorial integrity and sovereign equality. You only change those borders by voluntary means, by plebiscite or elections that are internationally supervised, which would be my ideal, and let the people of that nation speak as to what their preferences are. That was the South African way of getting to the democracy that we have down here. And I'm afraid right now that there is no room for negotiations, as much as I would like to see them. But Professor Filatova is more closer to this than I am.
Professor Filatova, is staying away from voting in the condemnation of the violation of international humanitarian law, violations and abuses of human rights during this conflict something that can be justifiable in the name of we would like to see more peace talks and therefore we should not take sides?
Well, I think that the countries are abstaining not out of abstract principles, what is best and what is worst. They are abstaining because they have their own interests. And it is quite obvious to me that the countries which abstained, starting with China, for example, which is quite a big move for China because normally it supports Russia, but it abstained, and that shows me that China has a particular interest of taking no sides and watching the conflict from the outside and then sort of using the results. But as for South Africa, I do understand its motives. I don't think that the problem is only whether you choose negotiations or you choose to denounce one side. South Africa is a country which had, the government of the South Africa, of course, had a very strong ties with Russia during the anti-apartheid struggle. And I know that many people here feel that they owe a huge debt to Russia, a huge debt for the support which it gave to the ANC in exile and to its struggle. There is also a very strong still anti-imperialist feeling, anti-Western feeling. I see what is trending on the networks of the MK veterans, for example. And we know that in South Africa, Communist Party, it did take sides. It supported Russia and it definitely denounced Ukraine. There is a widely spread opinion here that Ukraine is, as it is according to Putin, is a Nazi country, nationalist country, or chauvinist country, and maybe racist country. So the ANC, the government, has to take into consideration all these things, all these moods, and these are all the ANC allies, and within the ANC itself, this is a very strong tendency, very strong thinking. So I think I understand why they did it. They did it for themselves and not for the better principles of negotiations.
Yeah. What's the worst case outcome here for Putin if he fails to capture the Ukraine?
Are you asking me?
Yes, Prof.
Look, there is. I don't think he will fail capturing Ukraine. I think he will achieve what he is aiming at, depending on what his final goal is at this stage. Whether he is going just to defeat Ukraine and stop at that, or maybe he's going to occupy Moldova as well, which was mentioned in the Lukashenko's plans, which he somehow demonstrated on the TV. Everything depends on that. But even if he manages to achieve what he wanted to achieve, but a very high price, and if the population is dissatisfied and the elite stops supporting him, nothing good is going to come out of it, let alone the defeat, which I do not foresee actually, but his fate is going to be quite deplorable.
Yeah. Professor Stremlau, despite the humiliation, of course, that will come with it, but highly unlikely, as Professor Filatova says, if indeed Putin doesn't reach his end game, his end goal, what's the worst that he could be facing?
Well, the worst is really the Ukrainian people are going to have a very difficult time, if at all, recovering from this. There are already, the UN estimates, 1 million refugees. It could be 10 million refugees. And what is really dismaying is the siege that's now being mounted to strangle Kyiv or the other towns which have millions of people in them, and sleeping in the subways and cutting off their water, cutting off their electricity, cutting off their energy in order to bring them to defeat. And I think Professor Filatova is right. I think Vladimir Putin is determined to win, and it will be at the expense of the Ukrainian people who don't really deserve this kind of death. In my judgment, they have done nothing wrong other than trying to pull themselves together and have a society that is united and free and has a media that's free. And so it's just a tragedy of enormous proportions. And I didn't think I'd see it in Europe in my lifetime. And I didn't see it, I think I'd see it in real time by the fact that we have, thanks to TikTok and social media, firsthand visuals, a lot of disinformation, I know, but you look through all of the reports coming out and you just want to weep.
Yeah. Professor Filatova?
John, I'm sorry, just one word. You said it is at the expense of the Ukrainian people. I agree, but it is also at the expense of the Russian people and actually of the whole world.
Yeah, and that's where I wanted to come in, Prof, to say, having this expectation that Russia's army will be successful in carrying out their end game, will this be an easy transition into Russian rule in the Ukraine?
No.
I don't expect an easy transition. I cannot imagine how the Russian government is intending to rule that country. Because any puppet that could be put at the head of the purportedly Ukrainian government would know that that person would be hated by the population. there was supposed to be a military coup against Zelensky, and it did not happen. And I think that it did not happen just because the people who were going to participate in that saw the reaction of the population, and they understood that they would be absolutely condemned and damned and condemned to death. I don't know what would have happened to them. So I'm not sure how, and even physically, it's a huge country. And where does Russia get the resources? It is leaving these cities without any facilities. How is it going to feed this population? It is absolutely mind-boggling.
Yeah, Professor Stremlau?
Just a point that the resistance that we've seen that I underestimated speaks to what is likely to be aided by the Western European countries that have been so mobilized and so inspired by Zelensky and his resistance. I can see this resistance going on, and it's in a way not, it's a very different country than Afghanistan, but the Russians miscalculated by going into Afghanistan, as did the Americans, but the Russians really did underestimate the resistance that could be mounted against them, and I think that you send in young recruits like they are now in the soldiers. Their morale is not great, and the morale of the Ukrainian people is, this is my country, I'm prepared to die for it.
What does this mean now for NATO and its, I suppose, its thinking around the Ukraine, around maybe even other countries, and moving in, as they say, an inch into the east or not?
Well, if you're asking me, one of my amazing things this last week has taught me an awful lot about the Western European community. I didn't think that they would be as united as they have proven to be, both in terms of accepting the costs of sanctions, but also, more importantly, the non-economic assistance that they're now providing. I didn't think I'd ever see Germany giving weapons to Ukraine. But I can see that they are nervous about the three Baltic countries that are NATO members, and under Article 5, all for one, one for all. And so Putin may start rattling the nuclear threat, as he's already done, and probably for the first step would be tactical nuclear weapons for battlefield or for city destruction. And I just worry terribly about the escalation probabilities, but I am impressed by the European Union sticking together.
Prof. Filatova, there are many opinions around, for example, the NATO expansion into the east of Russia, saying that many predicted that this would lead to war, but those warnings were ignored. Will NATO rethink its strategy?
Well, it's too late, because Russia has done everything to get closer to the NATO. Putin said that he was worried about his security, but he has done now everything to destroy that security, because he has now direct borders with more NATO countries than before. So that is one thing. And the other thing is that, of course, NATO has now got a real reason to strengthen itself and to consolidate its arms and to consolidate its position in Europe. And you can see it already, because Germany has not only pledged to give arms to Ukrainians, but it has also pledged to give 2% of its budget to NATO, which it was not doing for a very long time, I don't know if ever. So Russian president has actually managed to strengthen NATO.
Professor Filatova, Professor John Stremlau, appreciate your time. Thank you very much for your analysis.